In Max, you control selectability, visibility, and renderability most easily in the outliner. On the left, in the outliner, we have all elements present in the scene. If I click the snowflake icon, I make it unselectable. If I click this eye icon, I make it invisible. If I click it again, it comes back, and so on. I make it unrenderable. The same way, if I configure my columns to display and double click the filter I want. For example, I will also add display as box and call back faces. Now, when I toggle these, they will instantly activate. All of these options are also available here on the right under the display tab from this window. I control things locally via this display properties drop-down menu, where I just toggle these on and off as I see fit. I can freeze selected object, and now even if I can select it in the viewport, or even if I can select it in the outliner, I can also unfreeze all, for example, and I will be able to select it. Or I can, if I have multiple objects, I can unfreeze by name, and this little window will appear where I select the box and unfreeze, or unfreeze by hit where I select the object again and it unfreezes. And I can select it again. Same thing applies to hiding the object from the scene. And if I right click after, and if I want to get them back, I just right click and unhide all, or I use the outliner. You can also right click an object, select object properties, and all of these options from the display panel or the outliner will appear here under display properties or rendering control with finer tuning, let's say, or the same buttons. But the downside here is that, for example, if I select freeze or anything from here, I have to click OK and confirm, and that's when it will apply. So no instant effect on any of these buttons. Now, Max also displays other properties via these little tabs. In this case, because this is geo, it will have these parameters under the element called box, because I can still control its creation attributes at this stage. If I select light, for example, same thing applies, and I will find properties contextually based on my selection here in this modify panel. In Maya, if I click on an object, I can use the attribute editor to control visibility, renderability under the chosen renderers tab, or any other properties like transformation, for example, or the geometry creations initial node, just like in Max when I press to the cube and I display parameters here. In Maya, shading is not done locally outside of this tab. Also, The outliner does not have any buttons to control things like this separately. But in Maya, I have to go to the channel box and layer editor, where I can create display layers and add things to them. For example, if I select this cube, right click on this layer, add selected object, or when I create a new layer and add and an object is selected, I can click this one and assign object that was selected. So now I can control visibility via layers. I can also control selectability only via these layers. So now I cannot select the cube or the light anymore because I turned it into a reference displayed as R, or something, the same thing displayed as a wireframe if it's T, and I keep pressing these to cycle through the modes. Any other display or object properties can also be found in the main node of the object, which is always the second one in the attribute editor. And any new properties or changes that happen to the object will always pop up here as a new tab. For example, this light now has layer 2 because it has been added to layer 2. X-ray is only controlled under this shading tab, and is not local. Same for backface culling, and so on. In Blender, when I select an object, it's very similar to Max when it comes to toggling visibility using this eye in the outliner. And for selectability, I have to go under this filter button and turn on selectable as a filter, and now I can disable or enable selection of any element in the outliner. So now my cube is not selectable, my right hand camera is. And I also control renderability, just as in Max, by pressing this little camera icon. I turn on backface culling here in viewport shading, and same for X-ray. There is also this button for X-ray as well, or I can press Alt-Z. If I go to wireframe mode by pressing this button or holding down Z and going to wireframe, when I toggle X-ray mode, it turns into a solid, but not shaded. So there is also an X-ray mode in wireframe mode. It's helpful sometimes. I also have some extra features like cavity display, which is helpful just as in Maya when I turn on ambient occlusion and anti-aliasing. In Max, you turn it on by going here in the viewport to standard shading, and under the lighting and shadow tab, clicking ambient occlusion, shadows, and so on. You also turn on X-ray mode by having the object selected and tapping Alt X, or toggling the see-through feature in the display properties. In Blender, ambient occlusion is turned on here in the render engine by toggling this button, and other similar options are turned on here as well, but they only apply, of course, to the engine that is active, in this case Eevee, and they are not available or visible in this solid view mode, which has at the moment studio lighting, which you can change, or neither will they be available in the matcap mode, which you can change here as well. But if you go to material preview mode, then ambient occlusion will be available. Locally, when selecting an object, this yellow square under the properties window has viewport display, and you can control how this object shows up next to other objects regardless of shading mode. So even if I'm in rendered view, this viewport display will always override my shading in the viewport. By default, it is set to textured. I can hide stuff by pressing H and unhide by tapping Alt H. In Maya, I hide stuff by selecting them and pressing H. Same for unhide. If it remains selected, I can press H to unhide it. After I've hidden an object, I can only bring it back by selecting it in the outline and pressing H again. Or if I go up to display and say show, and for example I say show all, they will appear again. Otherwise, shortcuts are a bit broken, so even if I press Shift H and it says show hidden, it does not show hidden. Or Control Shift H is display last hidden, which suddenly works somehow. But otherwise, for example, if I use display hide all and press Control Shift H, which is display last hidden, show last hidden, it doesn't work. So I have to show all again. There is no right click menu in Maya for hiding or making unselectable. You can only control visibility and unselectability using this template mode ST or R as a reference by adding it to a display layer. In Max, you can select stuff and hide them by pressing Alt H and unhide them by pressing Alt U. Otherwise, just use the outliner or right click and these buttons or under the display